So, amidst the big shots of the year, there's always one or two smaller titles that somehow gather attention, and this time it was Mouse P.I for Hire. Made by Fumi Games, from which I can't find anything, so I will assume that it's their first game. Mouse P.I for Hire is a first-person shooter depicting the adventures of grizzled hard-boiled rat detective Jack Pepper in a black and white world of anthropomorphic mouses, stylized over the Fleischer cartoons. I was told this animation style is called rubber hose because their arms lack visible joints most of the time, and as usual with the hard-boiled genre, Pepper starts with what seems to be a small case, the disappearance of a magician, and sooner than he can say cheese, he gets head deep into a vicious conspiracy. And cheese puns. Lots of cheese puns. From the get-go, it's painfully obvious that most of the chips of this new studio were placed on the presentation and animation, and I have to admit I admire when a creator stick to their guns to this level. Rather than pretending or skirting the issue, the two main focus points of this game are the black and white Fleischer animation and the fact that this is a Doom clone. But let's focus on the visuals first. There's an interesting dichotomy between the 2D and 3D. 2D animations are hand-drawn and gorgeous, fluid motions, exaggerated expressions, but sadly not many interesting character designs, nor plentiful enemies due to the limitations of the studio. Of course, there is some really good designs here and there, but the majority will be more or less the same. For example, Pepper's own design feels a bit bland and too close to all the goons that he shoots down. And aside from characters with specific traits such as being huge, being Scottish, and so on, it's easy to mistake one character for the other. Still, there's a lot of charm in everything, especially the guns and their reloading animations. Even the blender guns, such as shotguns, have additions and quirks with obvious inspirations. Everything is wobbly, well done with funny reloading animations such as Jack shoving a bunch of bullets into a shotgun or using a golden statue to entertain a brain in a jar. Yeah, you heard it right. You have several interesting kinds of skins for a limited range of enemies. For example, in his quest for justice, Pepper will find cultists, crooked cops, smugglers, and more. And every one of these groups will have different animations from the same base of enemies. Like the same base for an enemy with a gun turning into a cultist with a gun, or a cop with a gun, and so on. Yeah, like a cartoon. On the other hand, the 3D environments are plentiful and creative, but at the same time feel choppy and rough. There are a lot of places to visit, ranging from labs to studios to weirder locales, which I can't spoil, yet the designs could have benefited from a better tune-up. And I have to say that the studio had guts in making everything black and white, but sadly the grading of the black and white was off. Several spots are either too dark or everything, like objects and walls, have the same grading of grey, which makes everything, including different maps, sort of blend together. Also make finding the hidden collectibles a pain. Even if the developers made the collectibles pop out like animated cell in a cartoon, good luck finding a tiny black card amidst several dark grey boxes or the entrance to a vent in the middle of grey couches. So you have a very limited pool of really nice hand-drawn animated assets that are played like 2D cutboards, only older boomer shooters, and you have more creative, diverse, but rougher 3D assets that weren't fine-tuned. Still, no wonder everyone locked into this game. I have to say, again, that the hand-drawn 2D assets in a cartoon style are a hell of a pull, and it takes balls to go with black and white aesthetics and stick to it in this day and age. There is a visual twist that I have to admit it was insanely good and caught me completely unaware, and no, I won't reveal it. All I can say is that it's at the end of the line in the Teen Cell, the Hollywood investigation. On the matters of gameplay, yeah, this is as close as it can to good old original Doom as it gets. Actually, to be more precise, it's closer to Duke Nukem, due to the kick mechanics and freeze gun. You have the good old health pickups, armor pickups, gather cheese to be used as an emergency health, Enemies are in thin 2D sprites, several weapons and varied maps in both scope and style. Pepper has a hub area where he can pin clues in his office, improve guns, talk to NPCs for side quests, play a side game for tokens that can be exchanged for another gun, refill ammo, and buy missed collectibles and such. From there, he has access to a map from which he follows 3 investigation lines that intercede at the end. Sadly, of the triad of story, gameplay, and visuals, gameplay is the weakest. Don't worry, it's still paradoxically a pretty solid gameplay, but it's still the weakest aspect. How so, you ask? Well, I've been playing shooters since their dawn. Yes, I'm that old. I've played lots of good ones and some really, really awful ones. Ugh. A solid shooter is simply a game where you are given a fair chance, thus given enough space in arenas to maneuver, the enemies are varied enough to not get things overly stale, they don't hit you hard, etc, etc. Now, Mouse P.I. finished its homework but didn't ace it. You have several stages with different kinds of structure, which is good. There is no map, but things are small enough that getting lost isn't an issue. And you have a tool to guide you, which I mostly use it to know where not to go next, because sadly this game avoids backtracking harder than rich people avoid taxes. Which makes the already hard task of finding collectibles such as newspapers, comic strips, cards and schematics to upgrade your guns a headache. It gets even worse when you realize that some side quests pop only after you finish a specific stage, so you have to keep checking everyone all the time to see if something new shows up, or else it's lost forever. It would be one thing to be unable to redo a stage, but here if you step through the wrong door, you're immediately locked out of everything, including power-ups and ammo you may have wanted to save. While enemies have several different skins, there isn't much of a variety combat-wise, which is quite understandable considering that every single enemy is painstakingly drawn by hand. You have the classic melee rushers, the swarmers, the bullet sponges, the flyers, and after a while, the game just starts throwing them in waves, instead of trying for more challenging enemy placement or different strategies. While old boomer shooters of yore also used this, especially Sillier Sam, the difference is that here enemies aren't sturdy enough for you to have to rely on the combination of several weapons. Speaking of, the weapons are sadly the greatest problem in the gameplay. You end sticking to the same 3 guns for most of the game. This because the basic shotgun, the Tommy gun and the acid spitter are efficient, damaging and have a lot of ammo. Everything else is either too problematic to use, due to a lot of splash damage or rarity of ammo, etc. or too situational. For example, the cannon. It has a lot of damage and a huge splash zone, but enemy waves nearly always have melee chargers, so using the cannon is a surefire way of committing suicide, unless you use it as a sniper rifle. The cannon has an outfire mode that turns it into a gigantic shotgun, but again, why not simply switch to the normal shotgun instead of using extremely rare ammo? The initial pistol is also hella bad. This ends in a weird paradox where the medium difficulty was too easy for me, because I could just rely on the same 3 guns, and the hard difficulty was too hard because I was constantly being swarmed and shot all over. A game that balanced those well was the first Doom remake. Guns were plentiful, but so were enemies, and arenas were often open enough that you had to properly strategize how to use the best of each gun in order to not run dry of ammo. But, like I said, even with its problems, it's a solid gunplay. It has dashes, slides, Pepper gains new skills as the plot progresses, arenas aren't tiny, it throws corridors, ambushes, multi-level arenas, and even if combat ends with the same tactics, I didn't feel it was boring due to how brief the matches were. There is a good hit detection and the weapons that matter do pack a solid punch, and while the bosses aren't overly special, the only 2 memorable fights were against the robot and the sewer bosses. The others weren't bad, but nothing special either. They do have a good variety, while several boomer shooters just repeat big guy with big health bar. But while combat is the main course, it's not the only dish in this meal. There are also power-ups and platforming. Both are light and simple, with the power-ups being clearly inspired by cartoons and other games such as Cuphead or Popeye, and the platforming being light. There are several movements for Pepper to do, such as wall runs or spinning his tail like a helicopter. The studio could have done harder platforming challenges, since I only had trouble with one or two moments, but since this is their first game, I understand why they didn't go overboard. And since this game uses Unity, there is the usual hiccups that come with the territory, such as sudden stuttering and light flickering, but nothing absurdly awful. Last but not least, Mouse P.I sports two main minigames: the lockpick that uses something akin to Snake, and the baseball card game. The latter is used mostly to unlock a special gun. The game itself isn't bad, it has good sets of rules, but it relies on collecting cards in the stages, and when you do, you discover that some of these cards are in fact detrimental to the game. Said game is also slow as molasses, and it would benefit a lot if the computer would give up a match if you score too high for it to keep up. The in-game balance also ends up making money worthless, since you can only use it to buy ammo, which is plentiful in the stages you visit, cards that you may not use, and the collectibles you may have missed. Overall, the gameplay isn't bad, but it shows the studio's lack of experience in the genre. They do have a solid grasp on the basics, were able to dish something fun, but the calibrations were off, and they do need to give the player a way to reduce stages for these collectibles. Now, for the writing, we have an interesting scenario. Okay, I will just get on with it. Yes, this game features a lot of cheese puns. Yes, they overstayed their welcome, harder than a mother-in-law in an 80s sitcom or The Simpsons after they became zombies. Yes, they could have worked better. No, it doesn't ruin the game. Which brings us to the humor. Mouse P.I may be inspired by cartoons, but the majority of the humor comes from references. So many references. This game is chock full of all sorts of references. References to Troy Baker's career, to other games, to events like the journalist who failed Cuphead, Wolfenstein references, Resident Evil references, Doom references, visual references, vocal references. And what makes the referential humor work is that it's well dosed. References are plentiful but don't show up all the time. There's one or two per stage and they are well spaced and spread, so if you don't catch one because you're not an old fossil like me, you catch another. The references are also so deep that some are hiding inside jokes. There are also some other humor tidbits about Pepper and his interactions with the other rodents, like tasting something awful or missing an obvious clue. Those were okay, I laughed at some, and again well dosed, keeping the tone of the overall game somewhat tense and somber but not letting you forget it's a cartoon. The characterization is nothing superb, but good, just one or two notches above good enough. It also pulls off a good shade of grey versus black in a way that most modern media misses. Generally, said media, especially North American media, grey versus black means my side is full of holes, but they aren't evil. Here, and as usual in noir stories, shades of grey means my side may do some illicit things, but we are not completely evil like them. Jack is a hard-boiled detective that just survived a war, keeps seeing the worst of the world can throw at people, but he has a good heart and an unshakable sense of morality, and none of his friends whom you interact with are assholes. They are politicians who may not be saints, but are actually trying to help people, or mechanics that sometimes help bootleggers and such. It's actually nice to see them comforting Pepper after he goes through a especially rough spot, or offering you help. And a lot of the relationships between characters are explained through dialogues in a more subtle way, which is always a win in my book. Sometimes it's blunt to the point of being preachy, but most of the time the game gives hints letting the player come to their own conclusions before giving hard evidence. Now, if you feel overwhelmed by modern problems, if you are seeking a catharsis of slaughtering corrupt cops, of mowing down rows and rows of Nazis, this is your game. Mouse P.I is cheating in the story department because you shoot Nazis. How the will I not recommend a game where you shoot Nazis? It would have to be something insanely bad for me to not recommend a game where you shoot Nazis. And the story itself went through an interesting route. It involves the North American equivalent of Nazis, and when you involve Nazis, subtlety goes through the window, unless you are a hell of a good writer. So Mouse P.I didn't try to be subtle. The scenario isn't metaphoric, it's downright allegoric with just some letters swapped. They just had what was a mix between World War I and II, becoming the quite big affair happening in the old world, placed in the middle of a recession where cheese-laggers smuggle cheese. Shrews are a representation of minorities such as Jews and black people, with allegories to events such as the pogroms and the Tulsa Race Massacre having already happened. Now, I've said in my Zootopia 2 review that the second worst thing a mystery or investigation story can be is predictable, and the first one is boring. And when you have Nazis in a story, it gets kinda hard not to be predictable. So the question here shifted from what the Nazis are doing, which is always trying to completely dominate the world while exterminating minorities and being monsters, to how. I can't say it due to spoilers, but the writers took advantage of the cartoonish scenario to take refuge in the absurd and the pulp, which I think that it was a creative way of dealing with the restraints and the investigations, especially since cartoons don't follow normal logic. The player ends up following 3 different cases that inevitably intertwine. As it often happens in hard-boiled fiction, you can choose the order of the cases you tackle as you unlock them, but it's always crucial to go back to your hub once you've finished a stage because sometimes NPCs will have side quests to do. The tone is well balanced. This is a game that loves the hard-boiled genre, poking fun at it without mocking it, so no matter how ridiculous things get, characters will play it seriously, only very rarely poking the fourth wall. For example, Pepper will often say the usual gritty drivel seriously, and the writing ranges from purposefully cheesy to genuinely good. The stories themselves are good, nothing superb, but good. They do have a good balance, a good pace, with the growing menace being well shown. Out of the 3 storylines, bizarrely I found out the Hollywood one here called Tinsel the most fun to play due to all the references, but the most boring storyline with the least used potential. And the main villains end up a tad underused. I can say that because the main villain appears in the first stage, but then he just disappears and only shows up in the last act, denying what could have been a tense back and forth with Pepper. There are some twists that did left a bad taste in my mouth and a lot of wasted potential, but for a first time studio it's still good and solid. Also, it has been quite a while since a game made me pumped for the last stage. And as soon as I turned the game on, I heard the humming and said, how the f did they get Troy Baker? Yeah, there are some heavy hitters here in the voice acting. Not just Troy Baker, but also Fred Tatasciore, Rhiannon Mountshall and other experienced actors. So it's no surprise that, yeah, the voice acting here is quite solid. No complaints whatsoever. But seriously, how the f such a small studio got enough money to get these heavy hitters? On the music, yeah, no, seriously, I can't talk about the soundtrack. Sorry, skip it over, jump it. I love jazz, ragtime, blues, and all these genres are present in the soundtrack, so I am quite biased in this aspect. You can hear that a fight started when a snappy tune starts, and know that it ended when you hear a gong. They even got licensed tunes, so instead of me talking about the music, check me shooting people while The Entertainer plays. Yes, The Entertainer, by Scott Joplin. I actually got pissed that this only happens for a single shot fight.
Signing the checks. I could bet my last dime his bookkeeper knew the whole story. Well, film set props, film set rules. does a guy who cooks the books go to unwind?
This is an interesting game that I can summarize as the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. While the designs are limited, the gameplay is unbalanced, and the story chooses to go the basic but solid in lieu of more complex storytelling. I did have fun gunning down the throngs of foes, charging Pepper because of the quartet of the nice designs and animation, the gunplay, the story and the music. Fights were short and with good tunes, intertwined with exploration, and every couple of stages the goons changed their look, so I didn't get bored. Every stage had a pause to talk with the NPCs and share their stories, giving me a breather between the firefights, and the main plot, while predictable, had some interesting twists that actually used the cartoonish nature of the game. It knew it was a simple boomer shooter and it stuck to its guns, pun intended. So the wasted material feels more of a what could have been instead of a bare minimum of the bare minimum such as Pragmata. Characters aren't complex, but were pleasant and better written than the vast majority of the material around. So I'd say that, while having some deep flaws, Mouse P.I. ends charming for trying to do something different from the sea of boring Call of Duty clones, and trying as best as it could. It's not the second coming of Cuphead, but again, not everyone can be Cuphead. Sometimes all you can do is live to fight another day. That's all for today, thank you very much and see you all next time. Remember to like and subscribe. Now for the spoilers, I didn't like how the Teen Souls line wrapped up. Turns out, an actress seeking vengeance kills a Nazi who happens to be innocent of that specific murder. This was a golden opportunity for some moral conundrums, like the murdered person wasn't related to that specific case, but he was still up to his hairs in a lot of worse stuff. When is it okay to not kill a Nazi? He was a father who was hiding his half-Jewish, his half-Shrew daughter. But at the same time, killing him did help Pepper on the long run. Another wasted opportunity was the unexplored way of how Nazis and fascists use movies like propaganda. My god, imagine Pepper gunning down the people behind the equivalent of Birth of a Nation, it would have been glorious. Another spot that I didn't like much, although I understand why it happened, is that the last leg of the game, the Nazis burn all of Pepper's evidence, which forces him to seek help and just happens to find a recording roll incriminating the Nazis, which makes it feel as if half of the game was for nothing, especially since you talk to the owner of the tape and he doesn't say anything about it. Could have just given that as a last damning evidence, or having an awesome car chase after the stolen evidence, and I have to say that, yeah, the last boss was a bit too long. Anyway, that's all for today, thank you very much and see you all next time. Again.